The morning sun streamed through Chloe's kitchen window, catching the flecks of glitter she'd sprinkled on her volcano's papier-mâché slopes. Her small hands, still sticky with glue, carefully placed the final touch, a tiny plastic dinosaur peeking from the crater. She'd spent 3 evenings building this masterpiece, mixing flour and water paste at the kitchen table while her mother told stories about real volcanoes. The rich brown paint was still drying in places, but the red food coloring lava mixture waited ready in a small plastic bottle. Chloe beamed at her creation, this perfect miniature mountain that would amaze her classmates. She could already hear the oohs and ahs when the baking soda and vinegar reaction sent foamy lava spilling down the sides. Her mother helped her wrap the base in a towel for protection, both of them unaware how this innocent project would soon trigger panic instead of wonder. Chloe's sneakers squeaked on the polished hallway floors as she carried her precious project toward Ms. Alvarez's classroom. The volcano felt heavier with each step, but her pride outweighed the strain in her arms. Other students bustled past with their own science projects, crystal gardens, solar system models, ant farms. She spotted Tyler Martin with his elaborate robot made from soda cans and felt a flutter of doubt. What if her volcano wasn't impressive enough? Ms. Alvarez greeted her at the doorway with a warm smile. Well, look at this magnificent creation. Is that a working volcano, Chloe? The teacher's approval washed away her nervousness. Chloe nodded solemnly, carefully placing her project on the designated science table between a potato clock and a collection of labeled rocks. She adjusted the dinosaur just so, making sure it faced the classroom for maximum effect. The other projects were neat and educational, but Chloe's volcano had personality. It told a story. She imagined the eruption demonstration later that afternoon, how the classroom would fill with the sharp scent of vinegar and the delighted gasps of her friends, for now it sat there innocently, a cluster of paper, glue, and childhood imagination waiting to erupt in more ways than one. Principal Evans made his morning rounds precisely at 8:45, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically against the linoleum. He paused at each classroom doorway, observing the day's beginning with the careful eye of someone responsible for 400 young lives. His routine was comfortingly predictable: a nod to teachers, a quiet word to any lingering students in hallways, a mental checklist of safety protocols satisfied. When he reached Ms. Alvarez's classroom, he noticed the science projects displayed on the back table and felt a swell of pride in his students' creativity. Then his eyes landed on Chloe's volcano. The principal's smile faded. The project sat there ominous and unfamiliar, a conical shape wrapped in what looked like dark tape with wires or straws protruding from the top. His security training immediately overrode his educational instincts. In today's world, you couldn't be too careful. The memory of last month's active shooter drill flashed through his mind alongside news reports of school threats. His heart began to pound as he backed away from the doorway, his professional demeanor cracking under the weight of potential catastrophe. He moved quickly down the hallway, pulling his walkie-talkie from his belt. "Code yellow," he whispered into the device, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Classroom 4B, unidentified suspicious object." The response came immediately. Teachers began calmly ushering students into hallway lines for what they believed was a routine fire drill. Chloe stood confused as her classmates filed out, her eyes fixed on her volcano sitting alone on the science table. She started to reach for it, but Ms. Alvarez gently guided her toward the door. "Leave your project, sweetheart. We'll come back for it after the drill." The intercom crackled to life with the office secretary's voice, unusually strained. "Teachers, please implement Emergency Protocol 7. Immediately." Miss Alvarez's forehead creased with confusion. Protocol 7 wasn't for fire drills. It was for lockdowns. She herded her students quickly toward the designated safe area in the gymnasium, her mind racing. Chloe kept looking back toward her classroom, her small face pinched with worry about her volcano being left behind. Inside the main office, Principal Evans dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "We have a potential explosive device in classroom 4B, he told the dispatcher, his voice low and urgent. "It appears to be a cylindrical object with protruding wires. The classroom has been evacuated, but the object remains." As he spoke, he visualized the volcano, the dark paint, the strange texture, the plastic tubes he'd mistaken for detonators. Every safety seminar, every warning bulletin, Every news story about school violence converged in this moment, convincing him he was preventing a tragedy. Meanwhile, Chloe sat cross-legged on the gym floor, surrounded by whispering classmates. The teachers stood around the perimeter, their faces tight with unspoken concern. No one explained why they were having a lockdown drill right after a fire drill. Chloe hugged her knees, thinking about her volcano sitting alone in the empty classroom. She'd worked so hard on it, and now it might get knocked over or damaged. The injustice of it made her eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. The first siren wailed in the distance, then another, growing rapidly louder until the sound filled the entire neighborhood. Police cars screeched into the school parking lot, followed by an ominous black truck with "Bomb Squad" stenciled in white letters. Officers in heavy protective gear moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter around the building. Parents driving by slowed their cars, phones raised to record the unsettling scene. Inside the gym, the children heard the commotion and grew restless. "Why are there police here?" someone whispered. Chloe felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She remembered the way Principal Evans had looked at her volcano, the strange expression on his face. Could he have thought, no, that was silly. It was just a science project. Two bomb technicians entered the classroom, their bulky suits making them look like astronauts. They approached the science table cautiously, equipment beeping softly. One officer gestured toward Chloe's volcano, speaking into his headset. Visual confirmation of suspicious device, approximately 12 inches tall, cylindrical base with conical top, multiple protrusions from apex. Appears to be amateur construction, but potentially volatile. From the hallway, Principal Evans watched through the door's small window, his conviction growing. "You see?" he said to the police commander. "I told you. It looks exactly like the devices we trained to recognize." Ms. Alvarez stood at the gym door, watching the activity through the narrow window. Her mind kept returning to the science fair notice she'd sent home 2 weeks ago. The projects, Chloe's volcano, Principal Evans's sudden alarm. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. She turned to the other teacher monitoring the class. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I need to speak with Principal Evans immediately." She approached the police officer stationed at the gym entrance. "Officer, I believe I know what that object is. It's a student science project. A volcano. There's no danger." The officer nodded politely, but blocked her path. "We have to follow protocol, ma'am. The bomb squad will make that determination." Frustration tightened her chest as she watched the situation escalate through no fault of an 8-year-old child. She remembered Chloe's proud expression that morning, the careful way she'd carried her creation into class. This misunderstanding would terrify the girl, might even make her afraid to be creative again. Ms. Alvarez pulled out her phone, but there was no service in the gym, part of the security protocol during lockdowns. She was trapped, forced to watch a child's innocence get caught in the machinery of adult fear. The bomb squad technician extended a robotic arm toward the volcano, his movements slow and precise. Through the classroom door window, Chloe's volcano looked like something dangerous, a mysterious object being treated with utmost caution. The principal stood with crossed arms, certain he'd prevented disaster. "We can't be too careful these days," he told the police commander. "Not after everything that's happened." Inside the classroom, the technician's equipment beeped again. "No thermal signature detected, no radioactive materials. Composition appears to be paper and plastic." He moved closer, peering at the volcano. "Wait, I think I see. Is that glitter?" The other technician joined him, both now studying the project more carefully. The dinosaur figurine caught the light from the window. One officer reached out, not with tools, but with his gloved hand, and gently touched the volcano's side. "This feels like papier-mâché." The principal, watching from the hallway, grew impatient. "What's taking so long? Shouldn't they be disposing of it by now?" He didn't notice the changing body language of the bomb squad, the way they were standing more relaxed, the subtle shift from crisis mode to curiosity. Ms. Alvarez couldn't wait any longer. She approached the gym door officer again, her voice firm but calm. "Officer, that object is a fourth-grade science project. The student who made it is sitting right over there, worried sick about her volcano being damaged. I have the project instructions on my desk. I have the parent permission slip for using vinegar and baking soda. This is a terrible mistake that's terrifying a child." The officer hesitated, looking toward the worried children on the gym floor. He keyed his radio. "Command. Teacher on site claims object is student science project. Requesting verification." The response crackled back. "Stand by. Bomb squad is still assessing." Ms. Alvarez's concern for Chloe overrode her professional caution. "Please," she said, her voice dropping. "That little girl worked for 3 days on that project. She was so proud. Now she's sitting there watching police surround her school, thinking she's done something wrong. We're supposed to protect children, not traumatize them." Her words hung in the air as the officer considered her plea. Outside, the bomb squad technicians were removing their helmets, their postures now relaxed. One of them was even smiling slightly as he examined the plastic dinosaur perched in the volcano's crater. The lead bomb technician carefully rotated Chloe's volcano, his thickly gloved fingers tracing the papier-mâché ridges. "Command, we have visual confirmation of craft materials. What appears to be painted newspaper and school glue." His partner scanned the project with a handheld device that detected no explosive signatures. "Thermal reading shows room temperature. No chemical vapors detected. This appears to be a science project, sir." From the hallway, Principal Evans watched through the door's window, his anxiety mounting. "They're not taking this seriously enough," he muttered to the police commander. "In the training videos, they always emphasize that threats can look deceptively harmless." He pressed his face closer to the glass, his breath fogging the small window. Those protrusions from the top, they could be detonators. Inside, Chloe's volcano sat innocently on the science table, the plastic dinosaur now visible to the technicians. One officer gently tapped the crater with his instrument. "Appears to be a plastic bottle cap inserted here, possibly for pouring something into it." They exchanged glances, the reality of the situation dawning on them even as protocol demanded they continue their assessment. Chloe, from her spot in the gym, had pressed herself against the door's window, straining to see down the hallway toward her classroom. She saw the bomb squad officers in their intimidating gear and felt tears welling up. "They're going to break my volcano," she whispered to no one in particular. Ms. Alvarez placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but the teacher's own frustration was growing as she watched the unnecessary drama unfold. The bomb squad commander's voice came through the technicians' headsets. "Continue full diagnostic procedure. We cannot assume anything until we have complete verification." The officers nodded, returning to their meticulous examination, though both now suspected they were investigating a child's school project rather than a threat. Ms. Alvarez watched the scene with a sinking heart. She remembered the previous week, when Chloe had shyly shown her the sketch of the volcano she planned to build. The girl had been particularly proud of the realistic lava flow she'd created with red food coloring and dish soap. The teacher's eyes scanned the gym, landing on the classroom phone mounted near the door, the internal line that might bypass the communication lockdown. She waited until the officer at the door was distracted by a radio update, then quickly moved to the phone and dialed the office extension. The line rang twice before the secretary answered, her voice tense. "We're in lockdown. Who is this?" Ms. Alvarez spoke quickly, quietly. "It's Maria Alvarez in the gym. The suspicious object is Chloe Richardson's science project, a baking soda volcano. I have the project description right here on my clipboard." The secretary's response was strained. "I'll tell the principal, but he's convinced it's a real threat. The police are in charge now." The line went dead. Ms. Alvarez leaned against the wall, her frustration mounting. She looked at Chloe, who was now drawing nervously on the floor with a pencil she'd found in her pocket. The girl kept glancing toward the door, her lower lip trembling slightly. The teacher's mind raced through her options. The project guidelines were in her desk drawer, including the permission slip for using baking soda and vinegar. Chloe's mother had even emailed asking about the best vinegar-to-food coloring ratio for the most dramatic eruption. Every piece of evidence pointed to an innocent school project, but the machinery of fear had already been set in motion. She approached the officer again, this time with specific details. "Officer, that project is made from a plastic bottle, newspaper strips, and flour paste. The wires are drinking straws for directing the lava flow. The student's mother bought the materials at the craft store on Saturday. I can show you the receipt if you'll let me get to my desk." The officer looked sympathetic but unmoved. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but my orders are clear. Nobody enters that hallway until the bomb squad gives the all clear." He turned back to his post, leaving Ms. Alvarez with a growing sense of helplessness as she watched professionals in hazard suits surround a third grader's science project. Ms. Alvarez noticed the school custodian, Mr. Henderson, standing near the gym's equipment closet. He had a master key that could access the classroom through the back hallway from the maintenance area, a route the police might not have secured. She caught his eye and gestured subtly toward the closet. When the officer looked away to respond to his radio, she slipped into the equipment closet where Mr. Henderson was waiting. "I need to get to my classroom through the maintenance corridor," she whispered urgently. "This is all a terrible mistake, and I have proof on my desk." Mr. Henderson frowned, his kind eyes worried. "Maria, I could lose my job if I help you bypass police security." He glanced toward the door where the officer stood. "But that little Chloe, she's a sweet kid. Always says thank you when I clean the boards." He hesitated for another moment before nodding. "The service hallway behind the stage. It connects to the maintenance corridor that runs behind the classrooms. But be quick and careful." Ms. Alvarez moved silently through the dim backstage area, her heart pounding. The service hallway was narrow and poorly lit, filled with the hum of the school's electrical systems. She reached the maintenance corridor that ran behind the second-floor classrooms, counting the doors until she reached her own classroom. Through the small window in the door, she could see the bomb squad technicians still examining Chloe's volcano, now with noticeably less intensity. She slipped into the classroom from the back entrance, staying low behind the reading nook bookshelves. Her desk was just a few yards away, but the bomb squad officers stood between her and the evidence she needed. She watched as one technician gently picked up the volcano, turning it over to examine the base where Chloe had written her name and Science Fair Project in her careful printing. The officer's eyes widened as he read the label. He showed it to his partner, who shook his head slowly. They were beginning to understand, but protocol still demanded they treat the object as potentially dangerous until their commander ordered otherwise. Ms. Alvarez knew she needed to get to her desk, where the project guidelines and permission slips would provide undeniable proof. She waited until the technicians moved to the far side of the room to consult their equipment, then quickly moved to her desk. The drawer opened with a soft squeak that seemed deafening in the tense quiet. She grabbed the folder labeled Science Fair and was turning to leave when the classroom's main door opened. Principal Evans entered with the police commander, both looking stern. "What are you doing in here?" the principal demanded, his voice sharp with surprise and authority. Ms. Alvarez stood her ground, holding up the folder. "I'm preventing a traumatic mistake. This is Chloe Richardson's Volcano project. Here are the guidelines, the permission slip, even her preliminary sketches." She opened the folder, showing them the papers that clearly described the week's science fair activities. The police commander took the folder, his eyes scanning the documents while the bomb squad technicians watched uncertainly. The principal's confident expression began to falter as he looked from the papers to the volcano now sitting harmlessly on the science table. The plastic dinosaur seemed to stare back at him, a silent accusation of his overreaction. Outside in the hallway, the remaining officers maintained their positions, unaware that inside the classroom the tension was shifting from potential danger to embarrassed realization. The bomb squad technicians began removing their heavy gloves. Their body language now relaxed as they looked at the volcano with something approaching amusement. Ms. Alvarez watched the principal's face as the truth settled over him, the gradual draining of his confident authority, replaced by the dawning horror of what he had set in motion over a fourth grader's science project. The police commander closed the folder and handed it back to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Well," he said quietly, "I think we can stand down." The lead technician approached Chloe's volcano with a new kind of caution, not the rigid protocol for handling explosives, but the gentle care one might use with a fragile, precious object. He carefully lifted it, his hands now bare, and turned it to show his partner the clearly printed label on the base. Chloe R. Science Fair. Do not touch. The partner nodded, a slow grin spreading beneath his helmet visor. He keyed his microphone. Command. We are confident the object is non-threatening. It's a student's school project. Repeat. Stand down. But before the order could be fully processed, the classroom door swung open. Principal Evans stood there, his face pale but resolute. I must insist you continue the full procedure, he said, his voice strained. We can't take any chances, not with children's lives. The police commander behind him placed a calming hand on his shoulder. Bill, look at it. Really look. It's papier-mâché and glitter. The principal's eyes darted to the volcano, then to Ms. Alvarez holding the project folder, then to the bomb technicians now removing their heavy helmets. The reality began to pierce his panic. One of the technicians, a father of 2 young girls himself, gently carried the volcano over to him. See? He said softly, pointing to the carefully drawn lava flows. Someone put a lot of love into this. He turned the volcano slightly, revealing the little plastic dinosaur peeking from the crater. My daughter has that same dinosaur set. Principal Evans reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and touched the volcano's surface. His fingers met the slightly bumpy texture of dried glue and painted newspaper. The rough, innocent honesty of the materials undid him. His shoulders slumped as the adrenaline drained away, leaving only the cold wash of embarrassment and shame. He looked at Ms. Alvarez, then at the waiting police commander. I need to make a call, he murmured, turning to leave the room. Ms. Alvarez didn't wait for permission. She carried the science fair folder past the now relaxed officers and hurried toward the gym. When she pushed through the doors, all the children looked up with wide, frightened eyes. Chloe was sitting exactly where she'd left her, knees drawn to her chest, looking smaller than she had that morning. The teacher went straight to her, kneeling down to meet her eye level. She opened the folder and showed Chloe the volcano sketch, the project description, the permission slip. They understand now, sweetheart, she said softly. They know it's your science project. They're not going to hurt it. Chloe's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were of relief. Is it broken? She whispered. Ms. Alvarez shook her head. It's perfect. They were very careful with it. She helped Chloe to her feet and led her to the gym door where the police commander now stood, holding the volcano carefully in both hands. When he presented it to Chloe, his large hands making the project seem even smaller, the entire gym fell silent. The other children watched as Chloe took her volcano back, holding it against her chest like a rescued pet. The commander smiled gently. It's a fine volcano, he said. My daughter made one last year, but yours has better dinosaurs. The laughter that rippled through the children was nervous at first, then grew into genuine relief. Teachers began hugging students, the tension dissolving like mist. Through the gym windows, they could see the bomb squad packing their equipment, the police cars starting to leave. The crisis was over, replaced by the gentle awkwardness of adults who had made a very large mistake. Principal Evans stood at the edge of the gym, watching the scene unfold. He saw Chloe holding her volcano, surrounded by concerned classmates and a protective Ms. Alvarez. He saw the police commander speaking calmly with teachers. He saw the normalcy returning, and the weight of his overreaction settled heavily on him. He made his way slowly across the gym floor, his footsteps echoing in the now quiet space. When he reached Chloe, he knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. Chloe, I am so very sorry. I made a terrible mistake today. Your volcano is wonderful, and I should have recognized that immediately. Chloe looked at him, then at her volcano, then back at him. She nodded slowly, not speaking, her small face serious. Ms. Alvarez kept a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. The principal's apology hung in the air between them, sincere but inadequate against the scale of what had just occurred. Around them, the school began the process of returning to normal. The lockdown was officially lifted. Teachers started leading students back to classrooms, though the usual chatter and laughter were subdued. The police commander coordinated with his team to ensure a smooth departure, making sure every parent outside received accurate information before they left. Chloe kept holding her volcano, her fingers tracing the dinosaur's back. The project that had brought her so much pride now felt different, heavier, more complicated. She watched the principal walk away, his shoulders slumped, and felt a confusing mix of pity and resentment. Ms. Alvarez guided her gently toward the door. "Let's get some water, and then we can talk about what happened," she said. "However, your feeling is okay." The walk back to classroom 4B felt longer than usual. Students moved quietly, their eyes occasionally darting toward Chloe and her volcano. When they entered the classroom, everything looked exactly as they'd left it. Desks slightly askew from the quick evacuation, backpacks still hanging on chairs, the science table now conspicuously empty except for Chloe's project. Ms. Alvarez had the class sit on the reading carpet instead of at their desks. She kept Chloe beside her, the volcano placed carefully between them. "Class," she began, her voice calm but serious. "We've just been through something unusual and frightening. Sometimes adults make mistakes because we're trying so hard to keep you safe that we see danger where there isn't any." She picked up the volcano, showing it to the class. "This is a wonderful science project that Chloe worked very hard on. What happened today wasn't her fault, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes fear makes people see things differently than they really are." The children listened quietly, their usual fidgeting stilled by the seriousness of the moment. Tyler Martin, who had built the soda can robot, raised his hand. "Is Chloe in trouble?" Ms. Alvarez shook her head firmly. "No, Tyler. Chloe didn't do anything wrong. She built an excellent volcano, exactly like the assignment asked." She looked around at her students. "What we need to do now is support each other and remember that we're a community that takes care of one another." The classroom clock showed that only an hour had passed since the morning bell, but the day already felt completely different. The ordinary rhythm of spelling tests and math worksheets seemed distant, replaced by the lingering energy of the morning's drama. Chloe kept her hand resting on her volcano's base, as if making sure it was still there, still real, still hers. The school secretary began making the calls with a carefully prepared script, her voice professionally calm despite the morning's chaos. "Hello, this is Maplewood Elementary, calling regarding a safety precaution we implemented today. All students are safe and accounted for, but we did have a brief lockdown due to a suspicious object that turned out to be a student's science project." The responses varied. Some parents sighed with relief, others demanded more details. A few immediately left work to come to the school. Chloe's mother received the call while organizing books at the library where she worked. Her hand tightened around the phone as she listened. "A volcano? Chloe's volcano?" She quickly gathered her things, her mind racing with questions. What had happened? Was Chloe frightened? Had someone mistaken her daughter's careful project for something dangerous? When she arrived at the school 20 minutes later, the police cars were gone, but the atmosphere remained tense. Principal Evans met her at the office, his expression grim. "Mrs. Richardson, I need to apologize personally for what occurred today. There was a significant overreaction to Chloe's science project, and I take full responsibility." He explained the sequence of events, the mistaken identification, the evacuation, the bomb squad deployment. Chloe's mother listened silently, her arms crossed. When he finished, she spoke quietly but firmly. "Where is my daughter? I need to see her first. Then we'll discuss how this happened." She found Chloe in the classroom, sitting at her desk with the volcano positioned protectively in front of her. The moment their eyes met, Chloe ran to her mother, burying her face in her sweater. "They thought my volcano was a bomb, Mommy." Mrs. Richardson held her daughter tightly, looking over her head at Ms. Alvarez with a mixture of gratitude and concern. The teacher approached quietly. "She's been very brave. We're all working to make this right." The mother nodded, her focus entirely on her child. "Let's go home early today, sweetheart. We can have hot chocolate and talk about it." As they walked out, she glanced back at the principal with an expression that promised this conversation wasn't over. Principal Evans stood alone in his office after the last parent had been spoken to. The door closed against the quiet hum of the school returning to normal. He looked at the safety manuals stacked on his shelf, the emergency procedure binders, the certificates from security training workshops. Everything that was supposed to help him protect children had instead caused one to be frightened and humiliated. He sat at his desk, the weight of his position feeling heavier than ever. The protocols existed for good reason, to keep students safe in an uncertain world. But somewhere along the way, he realized he had stopped seeing children as children and started seeing potential threats everywhere. When he looked at Chloe's volcano, he hadn't seen creativity or scientific curiosity. He'd only seen what it might be, not what it actually was. His secretary knocked gently before entering with a cup of coffee. "Rough morning," she said sympathetically. He nodded, accepting the coffee. "I let fear override common sense. I saw a volcano that countless children have made for generations, and I saw a bomb." She paused at the door. "Maybe we need to remember that most things in an elementary school are exactly what they appear to be." After she left, he began making notes for the staff meeting he would need to call. Not about better security procedures, but about balancing caution with wisdom, about remembering that their primary job was to nurture children, not just protect them from theoretical dangers. He looked at the photo on his desk of his own children when they were young, remembering the science projects they'd proudly brought home. When had he lost sight of what schools were really about? Ms. Alvarez waited until after lunch, when the children had settled back into something resembling their normal routine, to gather them on the reading carpet again. Chloe sat beside her, still looking solemn but less tense after her mother's visit and the promise of early dismissal. "Class," Ms. Alvarez began, "I want to talk about what happened this morning in a way that might help us understand it better." She held up a picture book about volcanoes that she'd taken from the library cart. "Sometimes, when people are worried about keeping others safe, they can become so focused on looking for danger that they see it where it doesn't exist." She read a few pages about how real volcanoes work, then set the book down. "The interesting thing is that when the bomb squad officers really looked closely at Chloe's project, they saw what it actually was. An amazing science project made with creativity and hard work. They even complimented her dinosaur." A few children smiled at this. Tyler raised his hand. "My dad says sometimes adults worry too much." Ms. Alvarez nodded. "That's true. Adults have big responsibilities to keep you safe, and sometimes that makes us extra cautious. What's important is that when we make mistakes, we admit them and try to do better." She looked around the circle. "How do you think we can support each other after a scary morning?" The suggestions came slowly at first, then more freely. Giving compliments, working together on projects, asking questions before assuming things. Chloe listened quietly, her hand occasionally touching her volcano where it sat beside her. When Maya suggested that everyone could help Chloe with her volcano demonstration tomorrow, Chloe offered a small smile, the first since morning. The next morning, the science fair went ahead as planned, though with a new layer of awareness among staff and students. Principal Evans visited each classroom personally, making a point of admiring every project and asking students to explain their work. When he reached Chloe's volcano, he knelt down to examine it properly. "Tell me about how you made the lava flow look so realistic," he asked, his genuine interest helping to ease the lingering awkwardness. Chloe demonstrated her volcano with slightly trembling hands, pouring the vinegar and baking soda mixture into the crater. When the red foam began bubbling over and flowing down the sides, the class applauded enthusiastically. Tyler's robot might have more moving parts, and Maya's crystal garden might sparkle more brightly, but no project received more sincere appreciation than Chloe's volcano. Ms. Alvarez made sure to take pictures of Chloe beaming beside her erupting creation, the morning sunlight catching the glitter on the slopes, and the pleased expression on her face. The images would go home to parents and into the school newsletter, not as a story about a security scare, but as a celebration of student achievement. As the foam subsided, Chloe looked around at her classmates' supportive faces, then at her teacher's proud expression, and finally at the principal who nodded with respect. The volcano had erupted after all, just as she'd planned, and the response was exactly what she'd originally hoped for: wonder and appreciation instead of fear and confusion. The local newspaper ran a brief piece about the incident the following day, focusing on the positive resolution rather than the initial overreaction. Maplewood Science Fair proceeds after security misunderstanding, read the headline, with a photo of Chloe smiling beside her volcano. The article quoted Principal Evans acknowledging the error in judgment and emphasizing the school's commitment to both safety and supporting student creativity. Parents received an email from the superintendent explaining the new protocols being implemented. Teachers would now display science project guidelines visibly near displayed projects, and all student creations would be clearly labeled. The message struck a careful balance between acknowledging the mistake and reassuring families about safety procedures. At the grocery store, Chloe's mother encountered other parents who expressed support. "I'm just glad everyone's okay," one said. "And honestly, I might have thought the same thing seeing that volcano without context." Another parent added, "The important thing is how they handled it afterward. Chloe should be proud of her project." The school board received a few concerned calls, but most community response focused on the need for balance between caution and common sense. The local police department even offered to send officers to future science fairs to admire projects and explain their work to students, turning a negative experience into an opportunity for positive community engagement. That evening, Chloe sat at the kitchen table with her mother, carefully repairing a small crack in her volcano's base that had appeared during the previous day's events. "It's like a battle scar," her mother said gently. "Proof that it survived something difficult." Chloe nodded, applying glue with a small brush. "Ms. Alvarez said sometimes things that are different can scare people at first." Her mother watched her work, recognizing the thoughtful expression that meant Chloe was processing something important. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked. Chloe was quiet for a moment, her focus on the glue brush. "I was really scared when the police were here, and embarrassed, but today felt better." She looked up. "Principal Evans said my volcano was one of the best he's seen." They talked about how adults make mistakes too, and how apologizing and trying to do better is what matters. Chloe's mother shared a story about a mistake she'd made at work recently, and how she'd had to fix it. The conversation shifted from the trauma of the experience to the resilience that followed, from the fear to the recovery. Before bed, Chloe placed her repaired volcano on her bookshelf, where she could see it from her bed. It wasn't just a science project anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes scary things happen, but they can end with people being kind and learning to do better. The following week, Principal Evans held a staff meeting to discuss new guidelines for science fairs and other events where student projects might be misunderstood. "We need to balance our security protocols with common sense," he told the teachers. "The goal isn't to eliminate creativity or make students afraid to bring their work to school." They developed a simple system. All projects would have clearly visible labels with the student's name and science project in large letters. Teachers would provide the office with a list of projects being displayed each day. Most importantly, they agreed that if something seemed unusual, they would ask the student or teacher about it before assuming the worst. Ms. Alvarez suggested involving students in the process by having them present their projects to the office staff during setup. That way, she noted, everyone sees the creativity and effort firsthand, not just the final product sitting in a classroom. The principal agreed, adding it to the new protocol. Chloe's volcano remained on display in the school library for a month, not as a reminder of the incident, but as an example of excellent student work. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Creativity takes courage. Maplewood Science Fair winner." The school had turned a moment of fear into a commitment to better balance safety with support for student learning. Chloe kept her volcano on her bookshelf for years, the glitter fading and the dinosaur occasionally needing regluing, but the memory of that day staying vivid. She learned that being misunderstood didn't have to define her work, and that even large mistakes could lead to positive changes. Her curiosity continued to drive her through science fairs and art projects, and eventually to a college engineering program where she still sometimes built models, though she always labeled them clearly. The experience reminded everyone at Maplewood Elementary that, while safety matters, so does trusting children and celebrating their creativity. Sometimes the most important, safety equipment isn't a protocol manual, but the wisdom to know when something is exactly what it appears to be, a child's proud accomplishment, waiting to be recognized. If this story resonated with you, share in the comments a time when someone's misunderstanding turned into a learning experience. And if you want more stories about childhood resilience, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning of the science fair dawned with a different energy at Maplewood Elementary. The previous day's tension had softened into a collective determination to make this right, especially for Chloe. Her volcano sat proudly in the center of the science display table, now with a large, clearly visible sign that read, Chloe R., Volcano Project, Science Fair. Ms. Alvarez had helped her add a small information card explaining the chemical reaction between baking soda and vinegar. Principal Evans made a point of visiting the classroom before the fair began. He approached Chloe with a respectful distance, his usual authority tempered by humility. I'm looking forward to your demonstration today, he said. Would it be all right if I watch when you make it erupt? Chloe nodded solemnly, her trust cautiously returning. The principal's genuine interest felt different from the performative enthusiasm adults sometimes offered children. When the other classes began filing in to view the projects, Chloe noticed how students paused at her volcano with particular interest. Whispers followed her. That's the one the bomb squad came for. But the tone held more curiosity than judgment. Tyler Martin, who had previously seemed like competition, now stood beside her table, proudly telling visitors, This is Chloe's volcano. It's the best one here. The moment for demonstrations arrived. Ms. Alvarez called the class to gather around the science table. Chloe's hands trembled slightly as she prepared her vinegar mixture, the memory of the bomb squad's examination still fresh. Her teacher gave her an encouraging nod. Remember, you're the expert on your project. Show them what you've created. Chloe took a deep breath and began explaining how volcanoes work in nature, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about magma chambers and eruptions. She pointed to the different parts of her model, her confidence building as she shared knowledge she'd researched. The other students listened intently, their respect evident in their attentive silence. When she poured the vinegar into the baking soda-filled crater, the classroom held its collective breath. The first bubble emerged slowly. Then the red foam began rising, spilling over the edges in perfect, lava-like streams. The eruption wasn't dramatic by Hollywood standards, but in that classroom, surrounded by peers who understood what this moment meant, it felt monumental. The applause that followed was more than polite. It was heartfelt. Students crowded closer to see the bubbling reaction, asking questions about how she achieved the realistic flow. Chloe answered each query with growing confidence, her earlier nervousness replaced by the joy of sharing something she'd created. The volcano had finally erupted, and the response was everything she'd originally dreamed of: wonder, curiosity, and appreciation. Principal Evans watched from the back of the group, his expression thoughtful. He saw not just a science project, but a child reclaiming her pride after an adult's mistake had threatened to diminish it. The successful eruption felt like a metaphor for the entire experience. Something that could have been destructive instead became a moment of learning and connection. As the foam subsided, Chloe looked around at her classmates' interested faces, then at her teacher's proud smile. The volcano had done what she'd intended all along. It had created a moment of shared wonder and learning. The fear and misunderstanding of the previous day felt distant now, replaced by the satisfaction of a project completed and appreciated. Ms. Alvarez announced that the class would vote for their favorite project after all demonstrations were complete. When the votes were counted, Chloe's volcano won by a significant margin. The recognition wasn't just for the quality of her work, but for the resilience she'd shown throughout the experience. Her classmates understood on some level that this was about more than science. It was about supporting someone who had been through something difficult. The principal presented her with a small certificate for Most Creative Project, shaking her hand with genuine respect. You taught us all something important, he said quietly, meant only for her. Chloe accepted the certificate, her earlier resentment fading completely. She realized that adults could make big mistakes, but they could also apologize and learn from them, a lesson as valuable as any science principle. As the science fair ended and students began packing up their projects, Chloe carefully wrapped her volcano in the same towel her mother had used days earlier. The project felt different in her hands now. Not just something she'd made, but something that had created change. The crack she'd repaired with her mother stood as a visible reminder that things could break and still be valuable, still be beautiful. She carried her volcano home that afternoon, not with embarrassment, but with renewed pride. The certificate rode carefully on top, protected by her free hand. The memory of police cars and bomb squad suits had begun to soften at the edges, replaced by the image of her classmates' interested faces as her volcano erupted exactly as planned. The project had always been good science. Now it had also become a story of resilience, one she would carry with her long after the papier-mâché had crumbled and the glitter had faded. The following Monday morning, Maplewood Elementary felt different. The hallways seemed quieter, the usual boisterous energy replaced by a watchful calm. Teachers exchanged meaningful glances in the staff lounge, their conversations hushed but intense. Principal Evans arrived early, the weight of the previous week's events visible in the set of his shoulders as he unlocked his office. The district superintendent had called an emergency meeting for 10 o'clock. Evans spent the hour before it preparing his notes, his desk scattered with safety manuals, incident reports, and the school's emergency protocols. He kept glancing at the photo of Chloe with her volcano that Ms. Alvarez had emailed him, the girl beaming beside her creation, the red lava foam still bubbling over the edges. That image, more than any report, captured what had almost been lost. At the meeting, Evans faced not just the superintendent, but also the school board president and the district's head of security. The atmosphere was professional, but tense. He began not with excuses, but with a clear acknowledgement of his error. "I allowed fear to override judgment," he stated, his voice steady despite the discomfort of the admission. "In prioritizing physical safety, I neglected emotional safety. The protocols exist for genuine threats, not for the creativity of children." The security director, a former police captain, surprised him by nodding in understanding rather than condemnation. "We train for worst-case scenarios until they're all we can see," he said. "The challenge is maintaining perspective while still being vigilant." The conversation shifted from blame to solution-seeking, how to prevent such overreactions while maintaining appropriate caution. They reviewed the existing protocols, identifying where common-sense checkpoints could be inserted. The superintendent suggested forming a committee including teachers, parents, and even older students to review safety procedures. "Those closest to the classroom often have the clearest perspective," she noted. Evans agreed immediately, already envisioning how Ms. Alvarez's insight could shape better policies. By meeting's end, they had drafted new guidelines for identifying potential threats versus educational materials. Science projects would now be registered in advance with the office, complete with descriptions and photos. Teachers would receive training on assessing unusual items without immediately defaulting to worst-case assumptions. The focus shifted from pure protocol to balanced judgment. Returning to his office, Evans felt the first sense of purpose he'd experienced since the incident. The mistake had been significant, but the response didn't have to be defensive. He could model for his staff and students how to acknowledge errors and implement meaningful change. He began drafting an email to all parents, outlining the new measures without minimizing what had occurred. Meanwhile, in Classroom 4B, Ms. Alvarez noticed the subtle shifts in her students. They approached the science corner with newfound reverence, treating Chloe's volcano, still on display, with almost museum-like respect. The incident had become part of the classroom's story, a shared experience that bound them together in unexpected ways. During reading time, she chose a book about misunderstandings that lead to friendship. The children listened intently, their comments afterward showing they understood the connection to their own experience. "Sometimes you think someone's mean, but they're just scared," Maya offered. Tyler added, Or you think something's scary, but it's actually cool. Chloe nodded quietly, her hand occasionally touching her volcano as if for reassurance. The school day proceeded with ordinary rhythms, math worksheets, spelling tests, recess games. But beneath the surface, learning was happening that wouldn't appear on any standardized test. Children were absorbing lessons about forgiveness, resilience, and the complexity of adult decision making. Teachers found themselves having deeper conversations with students about fear, safety, and trust. At afternoon pickup, parents noticed the difference too. The conversations at the school gate were more substantive, less focused on gossip, and more on understanding. Several parents thanked Principal Evans for his transparency about the changes being implemented. One father commented, "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. That's what I want my daughter to learn." As the building emptied, Evans walked the quiet hallways, pausing at each classroom door. In room 4B, he saw Chloe's volcano standing proudly on the display table, the afternoon sun catching its glittering surface. He took out his phone and snapped a picture, not for any report, but for himself. A reminder that sometimes the greatest threats aren't what we fear, but the opportunities we miss when we let fear guide us. The institutional review would continue for weeks, with policy manuals being rewritten and training schedules being developed. But the most important change had already begun, a shift in perspective that valued both safety and trust, both caution and creativity. The school had weathered a crisis of confidence and emerged with something potentially stronger than before. The understanding that protecting children means nurturing their spirits as well as their bodies. Word count, 747. This completes the current 16 10-word target when combined with the previous content. The story of Chloe's volcano rippled through Maplewood Elementary in ways both visible and subtle. In the teacher's lounge, conversations shifted from pure academic concerns to thoughtful discussions about balancing safety with trust. Ms. Alvarez found herself approached by colleagues asking, "How would you handle this project?" Or "What would make this clearly educational?" The incident had become a touchstone, a shared reference point that prompted deeper thinking about their responsibilities as educators. Principal Evans implemented the new protocols with deliberate care. Science projects now arrived with bright orange labels provided by the office, clearly printed with student names, project types, and the words educational material in large, friendly letters. Teachers submitted project descriptions in advance, and the office staff made a point of visiting classrooms to see displays being set up. The new system wasn't burdensome. Instead, it created more connection between the administration and the learning happening in classrooms. The most significant change, however, was in the way staff approached unusual situations. Where once the default might have been suspicion, now the first response was curiosity. When a fifth grader brought an elaborate Rube Goldberg machine with pulleys and levers, the custodian didn't report a suspicious contraption. He asked the student to demonstrate how it worked. When kindergartners created robot costumes from cardboard boxes with antennae made of pipe cleaners, the office staff came to take pictures rather than raising alarms. Chloe herself became an unofficial ambassador for creative courage. Younger students sometimes sought her out at recess to ask about her volcano, and she would explain the project with a patience that belied her years. She'd show them how to mix the baking soda and vinegar. Her movements confident now, the memory of fear replaced by the satisfaction of sharing knowledge. Her teacher noticed how she'd subtly check that other students' projects were properly labeled, her protectiveness extending to her peers' creations. The school's annual safety review took on new dimensions that year. Instead of focusing solely on lockdown drills and threat assessment, the committee, which now included teacher and parent representatives, discussed emotional safety and trust building. They reviewed not just what could go wrong, but what was going right, the creative projects, the student initiatives, the everyday moments of learning and growth that constituted the actual life of the school. Principal Evans found himself listening more than directing in these meetings. He heard Ms. Alvarez speak about the importance of preserving students' creative confidence. He listened to parents express their desire for both physical safety and emotional support for their children. The security consultant, rather than pushing more stringent measures, discussed proportional response and situational awareness. The conversation had matured, moving beyond fear to wisdom. This new balance was tested when a fourth grader brought an elaborate crystal radio set to school, complete with a long wire antenna that stretched across the classroom. Where once this might have triggered concerns about surveillance devices, now the teacher simply notified the office, and the principal came to see the project in action. The student explained how the radio worked, his face alight with excitement, and the moment became one of shared learning rather than suspicion. The school newsletter began featuring a project spotlight section, showcasing student work that might otherwise have seemed unusual. A fifth grader's architectural model made from drinking straws, a second grader's invention for cleaning whiteboards. These were celebrated rather than scrutinized. The message to students was clear. Your creativity is valued here. Your ideas matter. Parents noticed the shift, too. At pickup time, conversations often turned to the new atmosphere of trust at the school. They're treating children like learners, not potential problems, one mother observed. Another noted, it feels like the adults are actually seeing our kids again, not just managing them. The initial embarrassment of the Volcano incident had transformed into pride in how the school had responded. Chloe's mother watched her daughter's confidence grow throughout the year. The girl who had once been hesitant to share her ideas now led group projects with assurance. The Volcano remained on her bookshelf at home, but it was no longer a source of anxiety. It had become a symbol of resilience. Sometimes when friends visited, Chloe would tell the story not as a trauma, but as a funny misunderstanding that turned out okay because people listened and learned. The school district took notice of Maplewood's revised approach. Other principals began calling Evans for advice on balancing safety protocols with educational values. The district-wide security committee incorporated common sense checkpoints into their guidelines, emphasizing that protection shouldn't come at the cost of stifling learning. What began as one man's overreaction had become an opportunity for systemic improvement. As the school year drew to a close, the PTA organized a Celebration of Creativity event. Students displayed their most innovative projects, from handmade musical instruments to elaborate dioramas. Chloe helped organize the science section. Her Volcano displayed prominently with a small sign that read, "Sometimes great ideas surprise us." Principal Evans moved through the crowds, not as a security manager, but as an admirer of student work. His questions focused on learning rather than risk assessment. The legacy of that September morning wasn't fear. It was a renewed commitment to seeing children clearly, to recognizing that education requires both caution and courage. The protocols remained in place, the drills continued, but they were now balanced by an equally important protocol: trust in students' creativity and respect for their growing minds. On the last day of school, Chloe presented Ms. Alvarez with a small thank you card featuring a drawing of a volcano erupting with glitter instead of lava. The teacher kept it on her desk through the summer, a reminder that sometimes the most important lessons aren't in the curriculum, but in how we respond when things go wrong. The school had learned that true safety isn't just about preventing danger. It's about creating an environment where curiosity can thrive without fear.